Hey guys, welcome back. So last time we created this account class and we also created this register function which doesn't actually do anything yet, but we are calling it from this signup.php page at the moment and we're passing the values in. So let's actually get started and write the content of this function. So like I said, this account class is going to validate the data that was entered in this form here. And by validate, I mean we need to do things such as check that the username hasn't already been used before, check that the first names are the correct length, check that the two passwords match, and just that sort of thing. So let's go back to our register function here in account.php. And the first thing we're going to do is just validate the first name because it makes sense, it comes first. So let's start with the first name. So what we're going to do is underneath there, we're going to create our validate first name function. And because we're going to call this function from inside this class, we can make this function private. So private function validate first name, like that, and put your parentheses and your curly brackets on, and this function is going to take one string which is going to be fn for first name, and then let's go ahead and call this function from the register function. So we can just say this arrow validate first name, like that. Alright, so validate first name and then pass in our fn variable like that. So what have we just done? We created the function and then we've simply called the function and passed in the first name into that function so we can start using it. So just to reiterate, we made this function private because we're going to call it from inside the class. So right here, this is inside the class. So we will never need to call this function from outside of it. For example, we'll never need to call it from here, in a different file. We're always going to call this function from inside this class, which is why we can make it private. Okay, it doesn't really matter too much. If you made this public, it would work exactly the same way. It would just mean that you would be able to call this from outside the class, but for what we're doing, it would be exactly the same. But it's just a good habit to get into, making it private if it can be private and making it public if it needs to be. So as usual, any questions about that, just let me know. So the only validation we're going to do on the first name is just to make sure that it's between a certain length. So we're just going to make sure that the first name they enter is between 2 and 25 characters long. So not more than 25 characters and not less than 2. So to do that, we just need to say if strlen, which is the built-in PHP function for checking the length of a string. We've used it before, but let's just say fn. So we're passing fn into this strlen function. So this will return the length of the string. And we'll say if strlen fn is greater than 25, so if it's more than 25 characters, or, so we do a double pipe symbol, which means or, and then the same thing again, strlen parentheses and put fn in there. Then we're just going to say less than 2. Alright, so we've created an if statement and we've said if the length of the first name is greater than 25 characters, or, that's what this means, the length of the first name is less than 2 characters, then we know it's not valid and we need to do something with it. So if it's not valid, what do we want to do with it? Well, all we want to do is push some error message into an array. So this account class is going to keep track of an array, and this array will store all of the errors that it found when it tried to validate all of this data. So for example, this error array might contain things like your first name needs to be less than 25 characters, or your passwords don't match, or username already in use. And then we're going to use that array later on when we come to output the error messages. So back in account.php, we're going to go up to the top and we're just going to create that array. So private, and then we're going to say error array like that. And then we can just say equals array. So what we've done is we've declared this error array variable and then we've just initialized it to an empty array. So all we're going to do is push some error message into this error array function in here. So inside this if statement, we can just say array underscore push, and inside the parentheses, it's going to take 2 parameters, and the first one is going to be the array that you want to push the item onto. So we can just say this arrow error array like that, which is obviously the one we just created, and make sure you spell this correctly. I'd spell it wrong. So this arrow error array, and then the value we want to push onto it. Now it's going to be some string, so it might be something like your first name isn't long enough or something like that. So what we might do is open a string up here and say your first name must be between 25 and 2 characters, something like that, okay? But we don't want to do it here. We want to do this string in a separate class, because if we wrote the string out here, when it comes to check if this is inside the error array, we would need to copy and paste this later, and we'd have this in 2 places. So basically what we want to do is make this string that we're going to use in some common class file. So rather than putting the string directly in there, we're going to write that string in a different class, and then we'll just use the string from that class right here. So let's create that class now, and this will make a lot more sense to you. So I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to save it, and we can save it in this same classes folder that we have with the account.php, but we're going to call it constants.php. So constants being like constant strings. So we're going to call it constants.php. Now open up PHP block and close it off. And then we're going to say class constants like that and put your curly brackets on. So now we have that class. Now in here is where we're going to keep all of the strings that we're going to use for error messages. So we can say public static, I'll explain this in just a sec, public static, and then we can say first name characters, which is kind of a description of what this error message is about. So first name characters, you know, because we're going to use this error message if the number of characters in the first name aren't valid. And then we can say equals, and this is where we write the string. We can say your first name must be between 2 and 25 characters, like that. Okay, and put your semicolon on the end. And so what have we just done? We've just created this variable here in this constants class, and it's static, which means in order to use this, we do not need to create an instance of the class. All right. And then now that we have this, we can simply go back to account.php, and then instead of writing out that string every time we want to look for it, we can just call this first name characters variable in this constants class. So instead of pushing a string directly onto there, we can say constants like that, colon, because it's going to be a static variable, like here, static, which means we don't need to create an instance. So colon, and then we just need to get this variable here. So I'll copy and paste that name of the variable into there. So we've done kind of a lot. Let me just explain this one more time for you. So we're checking the length of the string. We're saying if it's not between 2 and 25 characters, then we're going to push some string onto our error array, okay? And like I said, the error array is what we're going to use when we go to output the error messages here. So in this case, we would push this string into the error array, okay? And this string comes from there. So this string will now be in the error array. And then later on, when we come to output the error messages, so when we come to show them to the user, we would simply go to the error array and look for this string. So let's save that. Okay, I've saved the account.php, but the one thing we need to do is make sure we include this constants file, because at the moment we're using this and we haven't actually included it. So let's go back to signup.php and let's copy and paste this and then paste it below there in signup.php, and I'll just say constants.php like that. So we've included our constants file, and let's refresh the page. You won't see anything yet because we're not actually outputting this, but let's just make sure there are no error messages. So I'll resubmit the form, and we don't see any error messages. Great. So what we'll do next is output that and check it works.